They're as old as the human race, yet possibly the most untapped, most impactful resource available to any leader. Initially, individually, they're very personal, but do not be confused, it's critical when it comes to any organization. Whether that organization is a government or a country, whether that organization is a major corporation or a religious institution, or it could be an entrepreneurial adventure and certainly a family. Initially, individually, they are personal, which probably explains why so few organizations have been able to tap in to the benefits that come from them. You see, I would say that it is nearly impossible to happen at the organizational level if it isn't happening at the individual level. And you've heard of them numerous times before because they're as old as the human race. That is, until you make them new again. And what I'm talking about is this simple thing called core values. And when it comes to leading, and I would suggest when it comes to our faith journey, that they're not just another thing, they are everything. I mean, show me a business, show me a politician, show me a religious institution, show me a family that has had a breakdown, and I will guarantee you that I can show you where there was a breakdown of the values at the core. Now, a buddy of mine, when my book Good to the Core came out, came up to me and said, "John, what is this good to the core stuff? At this stage of life, I just seem to be bad to the bone." And I said, "Well, how's that working for you?" He said, "Oh, not so good." So it wasn't very long after that I had my buddy at Caribou Coffee, one of my very favorite places to go and have a substantive conversation. I love Caribou Coffee. I love their product, I love their environment, but I especially love their tagline, their go-to-market, which simply says this, that life is short, so stay awake for it. And I guess if caffeine is your main product, that's a pretty good tagline. But the truth is that when it comes to our core values, sometimes we stay awake for it, and sometimes we don't. And it's a bit confusing to me, because other than my buddy that wants to be bad to the bone, I just don't meet a lot of people that say, I don't want to operate from a place of core values. I don't meet many leaders, many executives that say, I just don't want to operate from a place of core values. And so the question becomes, why do we continue to have so many implosions of businesses, of politicians, instances in religious institutions, and certainly in families? Well, there are probably several reasons when it comes to this issue of core values, but I think there's a couple that I want to focus on today. The first is this. In fact, one of my biggest fears when I go in front of an audience of 500 people at a major conference or convention is not that I have stage fright. In fact, I just didn't get that wiring. I don't have stage fright at all. But what I'm afraid of is when I go in front of the audience to do an opening keynote and my only message is core values, that the first thing the audience is going to do in 2 or 3 minutes is they're going to shut me down. Because they say, oh yeah, I know all about core values. I've heard of them numerous times before, and you know what? They're right. They have heard of them numerous times before. But the question is, do they understand it? You see, it's dangerously a simple concept. And so we know about it, we intellectually or cognitively know about it, but the question is, do we understand it? But I think there's another more complicated thing at play, a more subtle thing, and that is simply this. When I wrote Good to the Core, I had no idea when I penned a certain phrase that it would resonate with so many people. But a lot of people have resonated with a simple line that says this, that we don't go running away from our values, we go drifting away. And one day we end up at a place that we never meant to be, drifting in a direction we would have never chosen. You see, it's so subtle. And we don't go all of a sudden from being really good to the core to really bad to the core. You see, it's a very incremental drift that begins to happen. And so today what I'd like to do is to have you think about for just a minute where you are with your core. You see, initially, individually, it's very personal, but it has major organizational impacts when we're leaders in organizations. And when we're trying to take our faith into the workplace, I'm not talking about taking our religion, but taking our spiritual nature at our core and leading others there's nothing more powerful that you have at your disposal. And so what I'd like you to think about is what I term the 3I formula. The 3I formula is made up of 3 I's. The first is that we have to investigate. In other words, are values valuable? Do you believe that values build value? The second is the idea to indicate. In other words, what are the values? And then the third thing is to integrate. So I'd like to start with the first I because it's the most important of the three. You see, no matter how well you understand and indicate the values at your core and how well you integrate those, they won't sustain if you haven't mastered the part of investigation. It's because it's hard. It's real hard. In fact, I will tell you that having core values will cost you. But I would also suggest this, that not having them will destroy you. You see, it's just a matter of time. So what I would challenge you to do is over the next 30 days, to simply ponder a very powerful question, and that is, do you believe that values build value? Now, I don't want you to answer that question as you're watching this video, because I think oftentimes what we do would say, well, of course they do. But I'm not so sure that we actually believe that. Because if we believed it, I think we'd see different leaders, we would see different cultures and organizations, we would see different sense of belongingness in families. And so I'm not so sure we actually do believe it. So what I'd like you to do is simply investigate that question. In other words, for the next 30 days, every day, just let that question wash over you. And I'd love for you to use every analytical ability that you have, every cognitive, intellectual capacity that you have to investigate that question. In fact, I want you to be really hard on that question. I want you to use all the experience that you've had to bring your mindset to what you really believe about the answer to that question. You see, for 30 days, just the answer is maybe. Maybe they do, and maybe they don't. In fact, I would suggest as you're going into a really hard meeting or you're having a really challenging conversation with an employee, or you're going home to a tough situation, or maybe you've got a challenging board in the community that you're working on. And every day I want you to ask, would values make a difference here? In other words, do values build value? In fact, on some days I would suggest that you really push to see if the answer may very well be no, that they don't matter, that they really don't have a place in business and in our families and in our churches. So what I want you to do is I just want you to go back and I want you to investigate that question. But in 30 days, mark your calendar, 30 days from the moment that you're watching this video, and I want you to answer the question. It's either yes or no. No maybe. Either yes or no. And what I will promise you is whichever answer you decide will change everything. Now let's just assume for just a minute that maybe the answer is yes. And if maybe the answer is yes, then let's begin the process at the same time over the 30 days of the other 2 I's. You see, as you begin to work on the other 2 I's, it may very well give you some insight into answering the question of the first I. Do you believe that values build value? So let's jump to the second I, and that's to indicate. Now on the issue of indicate, this is, so what are the values? Now I get a lot of pushback on this. In fact, here in the Midwest where we're recording this video, not so much at the time that we're recording this in the springtime, but in the autumn season, there's an awful lot of people that go to apple orchards. Now I'm assuming that they go to the apple orchard for the experience, otherwise they would go to a grocery store and just buy the apples. But when they get to the apple orchard, they actually do something. They actually pick apples. You see, they don't go just for the experience of the apple orchard, they actually pick some of the apples. Now, my fear is that when we go to the values orchard, we don't pick anything. You see, people will tell me, John, I'm a values-based person. And I said, that's awesome. But so were some of the most evil leaders in the world. They were also value-based. The question is, which values? You see, the value of values is in the specifics, not in the orchard. And so what are the values that you pick? Oh, people come back and push back again and they say, but John, I've got a gut feel, I've got an intuition. And I said, that's awesome too. And I don't have the research to prove this, but I do believe that 30 years ago that would have worked. That you could have had a gut feel or an intuition and living in a culture that valued values. But there's one thing significantly different in that 30-year time span. And it's simply called this: speed. The speed at which we move, the speed at which decisions are made, the speed at which change comes to us. And in the midst of the speed, you see, a gut feel or an intuition is a really risky formula. You see, what are the values that are at your core? In other words, what are the seeds at your core? In the next 30 days, I would challenge you to begin to chip away, just starting with a blank sheet of paper. I was teaching a leadership workshop all over the world, and it didn't matter where we were. I believe that 95% of the people coming through this workshop, they were all professionals. And I just assumed that they could take a blank sheet of paper and begin to write down the values that drove them. I couldn't have been more wrong. You see, actually, the percentage was correct. The problem was it was just the opposite. You see, on the first day of this 3-day, very intense leadership workshop, we would talk about core values for about an hour, and then we would send people away for 90 minutes. And as people were going out for 90 minutes to write with their blank sheet of paper, people would, you could see, you could see frustration. You could see that they weren't happy about having to go do this exercise. Well, it didn't take much to realize why they were so kind of mad, looking like they were going out of the room. Who wants to go write it for 90 minutes at the end of a long day, right? Anybody could figure this out, but it happens so many times. In every single context, you see, it wasn't cultural. It didn't matter whether in Sydney in Australia, in Nice in the south of France, Prague in the Czech Republic, or in Chicago, Illinois. It didn't matter. Every single time we would see people looking kind of ticked off when they walked out. And so I told my co-instructor, we need to kind of investigate this. And so when people started coming back in, you would see frustration, you'd see anxiety. Every single time you would see several people with watery eyes. And every single time you'd see one or two people that you literally could see tear stains on their cheeks. And men, it was not always the women. And so we began to ask our question. You see, I already knew the answer. They didn't want to go right. But I couldn't have been more surprised. You see, I was wrong again. You see, what they said is, I would say to them, it looked like you're kind of ticked off when you're walking out of the room. I guess you didn't want to go right for 90 minutes. So they said, no, not at all. No, I was kind of ticked off because we're here for 3 days. This is the end of the first day. And, well, actually, I was thinking I could write for a long time on this. But it's what they told me next that really explained all the frustration, all the anxiety, all the teary eyes and the tear-stained cheeks as well. You see, they thought they could write forever. But what they told me next is, on average, that 3 minutes into the exercise, that their pencil stopped. And they didn't have anything else to write. There was nothing else coming to mind, and something that they thought they knew so well, I guess you might say it was their silent alarm. It was their wake-up call to say, wow, maybe I don't know this as well as I thought I did. And so they began the journey of understanding what are the seeds at their core. And so they began to indicate what those were. I want you to think over the next 30 days of a version 1.0 of what the seeds are at your core. And we would be glad to provide you with a document that will allow you to look what so many people have said over a 2-year period in audiences where I've gotten their permission, where they've set for the symbolic 3 minutes to write down what their core values are. And with their permission, collecting over 750 different words. And I don't judge this list. I don't edit the list. I, in fact, put it in alphabetical order. But it's a powerful tool just to get you thinking. But before you'd ever look at that document, I would want you to start with your own blank sheet of paper. But over 30 days, develop 1.0. And then over the next 11 months to follow, just continue to see how that list evolves for you, of what are the seeds in your core. Now, if you're working in an organization, one thing that I would challenge you to do is to go pull the core values of the organization you work in. And I don't want you to say, well, we don't really live those values, or really they're just on the wall. I don't want you to judge anything. Oftentimes that's what we do. We look around and see, is everybody else living the organizational values? And the question is, how are you showing up to work every day to intersect your own personal values with the organizational values? You see, as leaders, I think it's important for us. And we lead at any level in the organization. I'm not just talking about a CEO, although I believe strongly it's their responsibility. But I also believe it's every employee's responsibility. In fact, I think in our faith journey, we owe it to any workplace that we walk into to know the values at our core, to know the values of the organization, and intersect the two. You see here, I want you to test me on this. That if you understand the values that are at your core, and you look at the stated values of the organization where you work, you will see those values like you've never seen them before. Because if you intersect the two, all of a sudden the organizational values become very personal. Your personal mission to live those out every day. Now you may be saying, well, John, I mean, personal values are personal. Why would we be talking about that in the workplace? Oh, I don't believe anything can be further from the truth. Yes, personal values are personal, but they're also very organizational because we're very systemic. In other words, everybody is depending on everybody. You see, good to the core can become very contagious. The question is, are we living our faith walk by bringing our values to life every day and intersecting those with the values of the organization where we go to work? Which leads us to the last and very quickly final part of the 3I formula, and that is to integrate. And this can be difficult because of where we have to live our values, right? We have challenges, we have tough situations, we have quick decisions that we have to make. And so here's what I'd like you to think about. The values are like tools. In fact, in my toolbox in my home where I live in Naperville, Illinois, there's an old toolbox that sits there that has some pretty valuable tools in it. But they're not worth anything until I get them out and use them. And so what tools do you have in your core? In other words, think about, how do I bring those out? How do I begin to put them to work? Here's what I want to challenge you on. And this is going to sound fairly tedious, but I do believe that it's very spiritual. And it's also a rhythm and a habit that will make enormous difference for you when it comes to your core values. Is that every night when you lay your head on your pillow, I call this the PM-AM formula. Every night when you lay your head on the pillow, I want you to think about what you have brought together in your mind as the values that are at your core. And then every night I want you to mentally, as you lay your head on the pillow, just go down that list. And think of each of the values. And then what I'd like you to do is just look across the landscape of the day that you just lived. Maybe a meeting that you were in, or maybe a certain attendant at a grocery store that you came across, or maybe somebody that cut you off in traffic. Think about all the things that happened throughout the day. And then think about and celebrate where you brought a value to life in that situation. Then also look across the landscape of that day and think about where possibly you missed an opportunity to bring one to life, or even potentially you lived the opposite of something at your core. Not to beat yourself up, but only to be aware. And then give yourself the energy to be renewed for the next day. And then every morning, the AM part of the formula is to, when you get to work, just take 3 minutes. We waste 3 minutes over and over throughout a day. But just take 3 minutes and just go down the list of the values that are stated in the organization where you may work. And what I'd like you to do then is look across the landscape of the day that sits in front of you. Maybe it's a tough meeting or a tough employee situation, or maybe it's a huge opportunity. And as you go down the list, just look at where are the opportunities to bring each of those organizational values to life in a very real and practical way. I will guarantee you that if you'll do this simple little PM-AM formula, that you'll be amazed at what begins to happen. In fact, the way that I actually came at that was through my experience in going through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius and thinking about the examen. And I think it's powerful when we become aware on a regular basis of what is at our core and how are we beginning to bring that to life. One other thought is that we can't do this alone. We need help with it. And I think oftentimes when it comes to our life, what we really want is people that that actually get our drift. Have you ever been trying to explain something to somebody and they'll say, hey, do you get my drift? Meaning, do you understand what I'm saying? What I really believe is that we need people that catch our drift and bring us back. You see, because day in and day out, we don't go running away from our values, we go drifting away. And one day we end up a place where we never meant to be, drifting in a direction that we would have never chosen. All of us will drift. And the 3I formula won't keep you from the drift. But I do believe that the 3I formula will help you know when you're drifting. And so who are your drift guards? Who are the people that you would give permission to say, when you see me drift from these values, I want you to tell me. And so we need to identify who are our drift catchers here on this earth. I also believe that there's another powerful drift catcher called the Holy Spirit. Is that what is your connection? What is your relationship there? To pray to the Holy Spirit, to say, here's the values that are at my core. Possibly in looking at the seeds at your core, maybe review the gifts of the Holy Spirit and see how do they align to the values that you're espousing at your core and how you bring them to life every day. In a business setting where I work with executives all the time, I'm reminded of a quote that I heard. And it simply says this, that if you can lead one, you can lead many. But if you can't lead one, you can't lead any. And of course that one is you. You see, how will you be remembered? Only you can write that quote. And I do believe that the answer to that question begins with the work of understanding what's at your core. Investigate, indicate, integrate. I wish you well on your journey. May you find meaningful success, and may God bless you on that journey. Thank you so much.